Hi, I'm Othais, and this is the Repeater Carabiner Modell 1893, a Swiss Mannlicher. That's right, the intersection of Austrian and Swiss design. I'm sure this is going to be the simplest bolt action we've ever seen. Let's get it over the light box. With an overall length of 40 inches, you could say it's creeping on a short rifle. However, that weight of 6.8 pounds means we are well in carbine territory to my ear. Now, it has a detachable 6-round magazine, although you would usually feed from a cardboard charger, and the round, of course, being the 7.5 by 55 Swiss GP90 cartridge.
Heyo, this is your friendly neighborhood May, reminding you to please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. If you really enjoy our content and want to contribute directly, please consider supporting us over at Patreon or Subscribestar, or you can buy some swag from our C&Rsenal shop. Thank you all.
Now, this little guy is something of the forgotten stepchild of the Swiss rifle history books, but he exists for a very good reason. You see, the Swiss Schmidt-Rubin rifle, model of 1889, well, it had some serious faults. There, I said it. We covered this early straight pull rifle with its own complete episode. But, just as a quick reminder, this gun was developed for black powder and then rapidly adapted to smokeless, which means it had a few holdover features that kept it from being ideal in service. Now, we listed a lot of the oddities that went with the 89 in our earlier episode, but the major glaring issue for today's is its sheer length of the receiver and thereby also the extra weight added to the gun. Just to remind you, that length came about because the bolt was ultimately a modification of the Swiss Werndl rifle. This rotating bolt design, first among the magazine-loading military rifles, had a fairly long throw with a pair of locking lugs at the rear of the bolt, actually attached to the handle. Now, I happen to have that bolt right here, along with one from a Swiss 1889, so let's take a look at what the heck I'm talking about. Alright, here's our Swiss Werndl bolt, alright? And we don't need to know a lot about the gun except for the fact that this is the breech face, the chamber would be here, here's our extractor. This notch in the extractor is for cross key. This notch in the bolt body is for an elevator that would raise the cartridges, and then you'd be able to feed them out of that elevator, okay? And then we turn to lock, and our locking lugs are back on the back of the bolt. Now, everything behind this base of the extractor, this ring right here, this is all locking and cocking, right? Get the idea? Well, when you think of the Schmidt as being an adaptation of the Werndl, it becomes pretty apparent at the front, so at this line forward. Because we have cylindrical bolt body, really long extractor, right? And then, right at this collar, stuff starts happening. In the original, the rear locking lugs were just turned manually. They're attached to the bolt handle. This is one continuous piece that's sleeved on here. In the linear pull / rotating symmetrical locking lug gun, that whole big space gets taken up by a mechanism that allows us to rotate the collar by pulling on the bolt handle. And that is a massive difference. I really want you to see this just coming off of this. That's a lot. Not only that, but the locking lugs go from here even further back. And there's a good reason for that, which is that this was going to be a small bore black powder gun, which meant fouling was going to be a big problem. And so keeping the locking lugs as far from the chamber area as possible, I mean really far from the chamber area, was a good thing. Unfortunately, smokeless showed up. Well, fortunately, because that made this action much easier to compact later on, but we've already sort of done that episode. But as it was in 89 and of course on to 90, these were way far back, and this is a very long action. The 89's bolt setup meant that the receiver is frankly huge, and it also unbalanced the gun. I mean, look at the gap between the trigger and the magazine. You don't see that on other rifle designs. Now, all this can be largely ignored when you're dealing with a 50-inch infantry rifle, but as the century was starting to turn, more and more of an army was being dedicated to specialty roles, so shortened rifles or carbines were a necessity. Even without looking to the future, the good old cavalry needed a carbine. For the Swiss, that was the Werndl carbine of 1878, still chambering the 10.4mm rimfire black powder cartridge. Certainly a handy weapon on its adoption, it was now woefully behind the new small bore options. And of course, that soon-to-be smokeless 7.5mm cartridge. Just as a reminder, That new ammunition would become the GP90 cartridge, a rimless bottlenecked case, round-nosed bullet, and curiously, a paper patch. So even as what would be the 89 long rifle was being developed, a series of carbines were being trialed, and these could get kinda funky looking. Now the Swiss wanted at least 55 centimeters of barrel it seems, and from the tests, I'm betting more like 56, but adding that much barrel to the already long action means these guns were fairly long and unbalanced, which is why you see these weird shapes and folding stocks being tried. This process was of course taking time, which started to upset one Ulrich Willy. Having studied the Prussian army in Berlin, Willy brought back a lot of ideas to Switzerland, mostly focused on instruction, discipline, and technical control. He would rise to chief of the cavalry and got to work reforming his branch, publishing a new cavalry code in 1892. An ambitious and modernist man, Willy wasn't happy about the cavalry trailing behind the old black powder carbine. In October of 1891, he began sending letters. Where was the new cavalry carbine? The matter had been dragging for at least 2 years, and he feared it would be 1893 before he could get his men a modern carbine. Oh boy was he right and then some, because even with his kicking and fighting, it would take until June of 1893 for the Swiss Technical Rifle Commission to really sit down and decide on what they were doing. Several designs had been submitted for consideration. These were largely internal, with 2 from Neuhausen, probably variations of their guns that competed against the Schmidt earlier, and a couple oddballs I sadly don't have any references for, from Vogelsang, Krauser, and apparently a modified Mauser. One foreign entry, however, had the officials very interested. But first, let's look at the solution's big brother. We've seen the Mannlicher 1886 family of straight pulls in our previous work. These en-bloc loading straight pull rifles started as a large bore black powder repeater, but ultimately were adapted to smokeless small bore by 1890, and they had a lot in common with the Swiss 1889. Both guns had started as black powder considerations. While the Swiss had gotten going late enough to adapt to smokeless powder, the Mannlicher had to transition to it, going from the Model 86 to the 88, and then the 1890. The Mannlicher also had to come around to small bore projectiles. Both actions were straight pulls and rear locking actions, though the Mannlicher used a locking wedge under the bolt. Both guns required a long receiver, suffered balance issues, and were much heavier than the previous single shots, especially when shortened for carbine use. And both countries had tried to do exactly that, and both had failed. None of the Schmidt or Mannlicher carbines based on these actions had been acceptable at the time. Now, just as a reminder, this is the Mannlicher to whom I refer, Ferdinand von, famed inventor who was behind much of the Austro-Hungarian armament by the time of World War I. Now, we have a fair few videos on Mannlicher's inventions, but I'm going to need you to forget about those for just a moment, because at this point, his only military hit is that straight pull wedge locking rifle. A wedge that was chosen because it was cheaper to make than his previous stronger idea. You see, Mannlicher had already cooked up a straight pull with a rotating set of symmetrical locking lugs. This had them put in the mid position, so while stronger than the wedge, it still had the same problem as the Schmidt, putting the locking lugs behind the cartridge. That meant taking up a lot of extra length, and if you think about it, means you need a thicker, stronger receiver further from the barrel, which means a heavier weapon weight. However, in his 1890 design, Mannlicher would move the lugs to the front of the bolt, and he changed the locked direction from being horizontal to vertical in order to avoid smacking the next cartridge during feed. This simple change allowed him to reduce the length of the bolt overall, and the weight of the action followed. The result was the Model 1890 carbine, which was adopted by Austria-Hungary, took a 5-round one-directional en-bloc clip, and chambered the 8x50mm rimmed cartridge. 10 guns of the Mannlicher 1890 pattern would be tested by the Swiss. These guns were apparently nearly the same as, well, the final product here. Their availability, weight, cost, and the fact that they allowed for the same general doctrine of arms as the regular long guns made them actually something of an ideal fit. So, on March 1st of 1895, they were officially adopted as the repeating carbine Model 1893, apparently after the date of the first acceptance of the general pattern. This was, of course, still well after Willy's fearful 1893 predicted date. Sorry, bud, we got there eventually though. I don't think it bothered him too much because apparently that same year he fell into a bit of a scandal and resigned. Well, for a while at least. For anyone curious, he would return and rise to Commander-in-Chief of the Swiss Army during World War I. Although that actually has very little to do with our carbine today. Now, we have the 1893, and then thankfully we actually have something else worthy of talking about. We have the Austrian 1890, and we have, the Swiss 1889. So we can actually talk a lot about what this carbine is and what it isn't. Now, this is not our gun for today. This is the Austrian 1890 cavalry carbine, but I want you to take a quick look at it, right? Notice particularly the integrated trigger guard with the distended Mannlicher style magazine, very thick construction. Come on back, quadrant style rear sight. In this case being a cavalry model, no bayonet lug, but they did have provisions for them on other models, and exposed end of the barrel with the front sight right on out there. At the rear, if we look at the action itself, yes, it's the straight pull Mannlicher that we're used to, but because this is before the 1895's adoption, we have the old style round cocking piece. This is what Switzerland would have seen first before they got access to any of their own design work. All right, good. And now here is the Swiss version of this gun. Right off the bat, I want to make sure I explain one thing. This is damaged. It's supposed to be a little rounder through the trigger guard. It's a lot flimsier than the original Austrian pattern, and it looks like it didn't pay off in this particular poor gun's example. But other than that, we got a really good example. So let's go ahead and work our way through it. I'll start at the back. We've got a cut through for our sling. There would be a leather bund here. The end of the sling would come through wrap on, just like a Car 98A or a Car 98K. Metal butt plate, deep curve to it, bringer on forward, no semi-pistol grip, because at this point, remember the Swiss had not started using that. They were still using the old 1889. Come forward and, you know what, we'll look at the action in a second. Let's skip past that. We've got, actually, I'm gonna run all the way to the front. We've got the front sight, which very interesting to me at least, is the fact that this front sight protector and front sight and this front barrel band are all one single piece of metal, which is just fascinating. In order to take the stock off, you have to remove the whole front sight. Now, it's got a blind key in there that hopefully puts it back to 0, but that is a wild idea. Now, as I come on down, we're gonna have our lower barrel band, which if I flip, you'll see has a fixed sling loop on it. I mean, rattles a bit, but that's a fixed loop. It's not actually supposed to be flopping around. And then as we come on down, by the way, note the full handguard, unlike the Austrian version. We come down, we got a quadrant sight again, although in this case, it's a little different. Let me get this gun flipped over. This quadrant sight is zeroed for 300 meters, has a flip-up plate. Ooh, isn't that neat? For 400 meters, and then from there is adjustable up to 1200. Now, those are all marked here on the left-hand panel, but you can also get some quick markings on the side for 1,000 and 500 meters. So a very handy but otherwise simple little sight system. Now, if you're wondering where you've seen a 400 meter quick battle sight before like that, like a quick flip over, that was on the Norwegian 1912 Krag Jorgensen. All right, so let's get her flipped around and look at the magazine, because this is different from both the original Austrian and different from the current 1889. And you're gonna see something similar to it carry on in future rifles with minor differences, but it is detachable with a button here. She pops on out, and then boom, we've got a 6-round capacity. I do not believe these were used for loading. I believe they were used for maintenance. I can't find any records of multiple magazines being issued. I find them to be, frankly, a pain to get back into place because as you'll see, there's this forward nub, so you can't come in from the rear. You've got to really get in there steep, like an AK, and then rock her in. And even then, I found this guy honestly likes to get loose if you're not paying attention and really set him in there. So, good idea. Maybe not always the best execution on new features. In general, this rifle was supposed to be charger loading. So through the top, we've got our cutout. You notice there's not really any grippiness to it. And that's because this particular guy is designed for the Swiss cardboard 6-round chargers, and they fit in just fine and feed just like you would from the Schmidt rifles. Now, there is no lock open on empty. All right, And if we close this bolt up, we're gonna see our bolt stop doing a secondary job, one that Mae is not too happy with, as we'll talk about later. But this tab right here is the bolt stop / bolt release. It's also a tensioner, so that you have a sort of initial snap you have to overcome when you open the action. If you, oh, I don't know if my own thumb's gonna get in the way. You know what, I might be able to see it from the front camera. If I pull this ever so gently, you should see it sort of pop up and then snap back in. So it's tensioning ever so slightly on the corner of the bolt. As a matter of fact, let's get that out of there so we can see, because we're gonna want to see this bolt anyway. Now this bolt is practically identical to the 1890. The only difference is this cocking piece. That's it. They gave it a shape that has a little bit more friendly grab for your thumb, not the whole big round. I actually quite prefer this, it's very nice. Safety's in the same spot, push in, push out to lock this central cocking piece back and therefore the firing pin back. This works in either the decocked or the cocked position. If we pull on forward, our shroud, our extractor is set down in there, and then our separate bolt head, which has a body that runs down in here with helical grooves. We'll see that better in the animation. 2 symmetrical front locking lugs, and a much more compact package than this. I mean, guys, there's no real comparison. This bolt terminates before we even get to the locking lugs on the other one. This is much more compact and much, much lighter, all right? And then, don't forget, I really want to sink this in. Because the action is locking here at the front, you have to put sort of the mass of your receiver up at the front, but then anything to the back, it's only really containing the bolt, right? Or the firing group or something like the trigger group. It's not containing the explosion of the gun going off. So you can use thinner metal from here back and it's not a big deal. So the receiver back here can get a lot lighter. On this gun, since these are the locking surfaces, you have to have everything forward of this at reinforceable levels, at thick steel levels, at strong steel levels, because that's where the pressure is. So that's gonna add a lot of extra weight when this much receiver has to be heavy duty versus this much receiver being heavy duty. That's pretty big savings. Now technically, I have more to say about these bolts, but first I think you're gonna need to know how this Mannlicher one really works. So, just so you don't have to go back and watch our old episodes, I had Bruno whip up a fresh animation specific to the 1893.
First up, we'll load 6 rounds from our cardboard clip. The heart of the Mannlicher straight pull is a set of helical cuts in the bolt body, which align with matching lugs in the bolt shroud. Push the bolt forward, and when the bolt head runs out of space, the bolt body compresses into the shroud, being turned 90 degrees in the process. Now the action is locked and can be safely fired. When the shooter retracts the bolt, the body is held in place by those same lugs, and is therefore pulled from the shroud, again being spun 90 degrees, unlocking it to follow along. This action is cock unclose, meaning the cocking piece snags the sear as the bolt is driven forward. The firing pin is driven by a concentric spring. When the cocking piece is released, it is sprung forward into the primer, discharging the rifle. The safety lever operates directly on the cocking piece, holding it rearward and preventing fire. A toe on the same safety lever prevents the bolt from being withdrawn from the action. The sear assembly is somewhat complicated in appearance, but it allows several components to be powered by a single coil spring. One such part is the 2-stage trigger, which is biased forwards. When pulled rearward, it rolls over a bump on its head until a second rearward bump makes contact with the underside of the receiver, at which point the trigger now leverages against the sear group and therefore drops the sear, firing the rifle. This component of the sear group is both a sort of transfer bar and an out-of-battery safety. A foot-like projection at the front of this piece can only rise into a corresponding notch in the bolt shroud when the action is safely in battery. The ejector is also powered by the sear group spring. Riding along under the bolt, it is freed by a notch in the bolt body to strike the rear of the spent case, ejecting it from the action. Finally, the extractor is fairly simple. It rides in a groove in the bolt shroud and does not rotate with the bolt body. Alright, let's go see the real thing.
Production of this little honey was first undertaken by Schweizerische Industriegesellschaft of Neuhausen. That would be SIG for you folks that are dealing with modern firearms. So the Mannlicher patent rights were licensed, and Steyr did not have to do any work at all on this guy. It's all left to the Swiss. And I will say that despite official adoption in 1895, there are open articles about this gun in 1894, even mentioning that a Swiss firm would be producing them, so it appears tool-up was already underway. 4,250 were produced, likely in 1895 and 1896. Those were all by Neuhausen. Starting around April of 1896, Waffenfabrik Bern would take over, likely due to wanting a slower trickle of carbines and eventually replacement parts. However, expansion of auxiliary roles, like the cyclists, saw further need for carbines, and so the numbers were pumped up. Bern would eventually produce around 3,500 more, although that high note was only reached in 1905. Private production of the 1893 was very limited, just 6 units that we know of, and an 11 extra series in their own serial block. The reason for those is currently not clear to me, but it appears they were exported. Now, as for actual issue, these guys would largely go to cavalry and cyclist troops. Being neutral Switzerland, I'm sure you're not surprised to hear that they saw no real conflict. As a matter of fact, the 1893 may be one of the shortest-lived Swiss rifles, because it fairly quickly fell out of favor with the government. And why? Well, the number one reason I hear is the bolt. Alright folks, let's get to the bottom of the complaints about taking apart this bolt. So set this aside for a minute, we'll start with the Swiss 89. In order to take that apart, we just turn out our key, rotate our body, pull this guy off, there's our arm. We saw this on our actual Swiss 89 episode, so there's no need to go into too much detail about this, but we're clear, we're clear, we're clear. Now I have found the only thing that's really confusing about getting this guy apart and back together, because back together is really the critical part, I guess, so we'll go in reverse without really pulling everything apart. The thing I found most confusing about getting this back together is sometimes you can do this, and then it really won't reassemble. You can't reassemble it wrong, but it will also frustrate you if your locking lugs are in the wrong position. That became more apparent after the adoption of the later 1896, but that's another matter. So put this in, and then we should be able to position our guy. Notice it leaves us the gap, so we position our bolt handle, line it up there, rotate, or once we're lined up, we cock, rather, and slide back. Oh, good Lord. And see, I'm not even doing this perfect. There's guys yelling at me that I should cock beforehand, but that's fine. Even without doing it perfect, we're there. We're in business, this will go in the gun. All right, so what's going on with the Mannlicher that's just so dang annoying? Well, for starters, they do have a habit of falling out of battery. This one's doing a real good job. As a matter of fact, this one's practically fighting me to stay in its out of battery position and not turn into lock. But my 1890, let me tell you, this guy loves doing this to me. So on the original Austrian, I'll just pull this back, and then I'll pull that trigger to release it, which is always its own fun game. I'm sorry, push the trigger to release it. There we go. And the minute it came out, look, pop, right? So, I have noticed in the US collecting world, the big tip to get these to sort of stay in position long enough for you to get them in the gun. You can kind of hold the extractor, but then once you try to center it in the gun, it's a big pain. They'll say take a dime and just get that to full extension and put that dime in there, right? And that should hold it if it tries to decock, although this one's now behaving, which is every time I try to make an example, right? Well, I got curious, so I went on eBay. This is 10 Swiss Rappen from the time period that this gun was available, and if you give it a little extra flex, there you go, guys. Those of you in Switzerland can use the 10 Rappen to do the same trick on reassembling your guns. But first we gotta get this to decock, because for some reason this is the most forgiving one that I've ever seen. I'm gonna take some of that slack out of the cocking piece and then, oh, good Lord. There we go, took a little bit of smack. Now, this is probably the nicest Mannlicher bolt I've been able to get a hold of, because usually they do this to annoy you. It's nice that this one stays cocked. So congratulations, Chase the elk hunter who lent us this thing, because they're normally not as friendly as all that. But with their decocked, we can start to see how to take this thing apart, which really isn't too bad in my mind, because you can pull the cocking piece out, favor the safety sort of over, and that keeps the cocking piece from going too far back in. There we go. So I've got her set down, there's a notch there, and then I can just sort of tug and rotate until click and tug and rotate and tug and rotate and tug and rotate. You get the idea. So we do this for a while. It's not nearly as slick as the other gun, but hey, we're getting there. There we go, we're clear. Now, at the front, we can pull everything out, but we have to kind of pull it together so that we get the extractor and the bolt. So we'll go that far, get the extractor clear, get the bolt clear. And then, from there, we can unscrew this cap. And there is a spring in there. Some spring pressure pushes that guy out, firing pin's free. So realistically not terrible, right? Other than that initial spinning, we're not too far off from the Schmidt, and boy, we're a lot smaller and lighter. So let's talk about reassembly. So when we reassemble it, what happens? Well, we start to have to really pay attention. So for starters, if you think about the Schmidt, it went together in such a way that it went together, right? It either is together or it's not. There's no halving it in any regard. Whereas on this gun, when I turn this guy all the way down, it actually desyncs a little bit. So I have to know that I want to manually align that channel. So I stop and I manually align that channel. Okay, that's one alignment I've done. I go to stick her in, and this is where we can get in trouble, because, see if I can manage to pull this off. You see how I'm pushing and turning, and I'm not really finding my way into the action? Well, it could be that this guy misaligned, or it could be that I'm just not quite catching it, so I'm gonna go in and roll the other way. I'm just not, no, Oh, found something. Okay, let's keep pushing and turning. And then now, no, I'm not really sure what I'm feeling. Oh, yeah, okay. And look what I've done. I've partially unscrewed this, so I screw them all the way back in again. And that was several rotations, and all you saw me was wiggling back and forth, being confused for a second, right? All right, I'm back in. Let's try this again. Now, if I'm really smart, I will go ahead and reorient this into the correct position from when it came out from what I understood it. But if you haven't memorized that position, these are symmetrical grooves. In theory, you can get this exactly backwards. Now, the gun shouldn't go back together that way. It shouldn't go into lock that way. But you can sort of half assemble it upside down and get really stuck, which is just a huge pain, and you can imagine being frustrated by this. So now that I've sort of had a moment to calm down, let me feel my way around in there, because that's what you're really doing. And then I get a hot streak, right? Nope, that's the upside down point, see? Yeah, that needs to be on the other side. Ugh, okay, let's try it again. Get her there. And boom. Now we're in the correct position. So remember I said you had to orient that cap. You also have to know the correct orientation of the bolt head. That's two things you gotta remember. You had to remember 0 things, well, arguably 1 thing on the Schmidt, which was to turn the locking lugs the right way. Now, once I have this in, I have to get it far enough ahead or behind, either way. Although ahead has just lost me my position. There we go, or behind. Either way, I have to get it turned out of the path of the extractor so that I can get the extractor down in there. Oop, on this side rather. I have to get the extractor down in there and aligned so that it can get sucked in at the same time as the bolt head, which of course, looky there, it's not exactly a just go and do it thing, because there's still some fiddling. I know my bolt head's aligned, I know my extractor's aligned, but I'm meeting so much resistance, and then I get it just right and it poops in. So if you're somebody who doesn't know this gun well, you're gonna think you're doing the wrong thing until you get the click. So much more has gone into this so far. Now, the final problem. If I go to reattach this cocking piece, I have to know to get this guy all the way into the decock position. So once again, this one doesn't like doing it, but I've got to push her down into lock. Oh, you know what? My safety's probably fighting me. Oh, push it into lock. There we go. See, so much simpler than the other one. And then twist this guy into place. Now, the good news is he picks up the threading pretty early, which makes it easy to start doing the same safety routine, right? You pull it all the way out and just keep tightening. Now, this is where the critical problem, I think, comes in, because we are affecting, in a way, the depth of our firing pin, although that should be controlled by the front of the firing pin as well, but we're also affecting sort of the stroke distance of our cocking piece. And you see I'm rotating? I've overdone it. As a matter of fact, I could, in theory, retract my firing pin enough to not be able to get around to go off. So you have to play with it until she's flush. And that's the third thing you have to inspect. You have to know that that has to be correct. So now we're getting in the range of asking quite a few things of your average infantryman. Now again, once you have it this far along, it's not ready to be inserted in the rifle like the Schmidt was. You have to then manually cock this guy back out. Oh, there we go. And in this case, she holds her position, so I don't need my 10 Rappen, and then we can just reinsert her in the gun. Okay, so, not the worst we've ever seen, but compared to what they had at the time, I'll take this for assembly. I'll take this for weight and compactness. While I haven't confirmed the story, a couple of my sources have said that troops were showing up for muster with their bolts dismantled in their pockets, having been unable to assemble them at home. I suspect, however, that this was really a minor issue compared to the major headache of having just one weird carbine in service versus everything else being standardized. This, of course, would affect you the most at the armorer level. While no specifics are given, Swiss authors note that in addition to having to get special parts, there were certain service operations that armorers could just not do, and so they'd have to go back to the factory, shipping back and forth unnecessarily compared to the, say, Schmidt 1889. Ultimately, the Swiss engineers would improve the Schmidt action, moving the locking lugs to a mid position, actually a lot like the old Mannlicher design really, and in the end this resulted in the 1896 infantry rifle, but would also be further developed into a cadet carbine, and then eventually the 1905 cavalry carbine based on the Schmidt system, a rifle that would solidly displace the 1893, although it did take some years for production to catch up. It would still be a decade or two before the Mannlichers worked their way out of service, completely out of service anyway. Moving more and more to the periphery, they would even get down to being used as drill rifles on occasions. However, they did see privatization, i.e. being sold out of the Army. Now, generally, privatization codes are P with 2 digits representing the date, The particular gun I have here now doesn't even have a privatized code. I haven't been able to figure out what that means, although it may just exist from before they started marking them that way. Because the Mannlichers could not be upcycled into, say, the K11 pattern like so many other guns would be over the course of World War I, they tend to have been privatized much earlier than the K11 and other likewise guns. They're also in their original shape, unlike the rare 1905s that just don't exist anymore because of conversion. Alright, that about covers our little gun here. I wish I could have gotten a little nittier in the gritty, but being neither really Swiss nor really Austrian, these guns have not actually received a lot of research attention, at least not in hard depth. Still, a very unique firearm, and we're going to have to go by and get Mae's opinion on whether or not she finds this as intolerable as the Swiss did. Alright gang, we've made room for Mae, and we have plenty of room for this little,
yeah, little is...
It's
kind of like a carbine and a short rifle.
It's mostly
had
carbine.
A baby.
It's carbine to me, especially the weight.
The weight is definitely carbine. The length does feel more short rifle. That's what's weird about it. So it doesn't feel like it should be the weight that it is.
We have the Swiss 1893 Mannlicher, the Swiss Mannlicher, and we're already halfway into the ergos. But why don't you keep going? What do you got here?
But to be fair, we're not wrong. It's the length on this guy, it screams to me short rifle, but you're right about that weight. It definitely feels carbine-esque when you pick it up. I'm expecting this to be much denser than what it is, and I think that's because of my experience with the K11 back in the day, because that thing is... It's got this similar length, but the weight is just there. That screams short rifle.
Yeah, this is the short rifle K11. This is definitely there for the carbine 1893.
Oh, you're trying to pass it to me?
Well, hold on. I'm just trying to get the length out.
Oh, okay.
All right, take the carbine, and then I'll get the 11. There we go. So, awkward team, go.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is much heavier.
Oh, yeah.
And much more rear heavy, especially.
Yeah, this one, don't get me wrong, the balance is still slightly to the rear, but when I've got part of my hand over that magwell, it kind of balances right there.
I can get my hand over the magwell and it balances, but the problem with that is my magwell is like 4 inches further forward.
Yeah, that's true, whereas mine is right with that trigger guard right there, which is great placement, honestly.
Now, don't forget, this wasn't replaced with the K11 directly. It was replaced with the 1905. The unfortunate thing is almost all of the 1905s were then converted into the 11 pattern.
Right, so we can't ever get a hand on one of those.
Right, but you're looking at something like this with an even shorter barrel, which means even more bias to the rear.
Right.
And just a shorter barrel. It's still... These guns are shorter than the 89s because they move the locking lugs. Right. But they're only a little shorter. The receiver on this is still much larger than the receiver. The receiver on this gun is ending, we're rough approximating, but the receiver is ending up by the rear sight. So you're saving a lot of length on the action with that particular Mannlicher.
Yeah, you definitely are. And this was like off of the 1890 Mannlicher style system that we're looking at, right?
Right. Weirdly, we happen to have one of those.
We're bringing out all of the ones it relates to.
I'm not gonna lie, this is the nice thing about having a series that sticks to a certain era, is that it's much easier for us to do these comparisons when stuff has managed to stay on loan a little longer, or
we hold them up
we
next
happen
to
to have it in-house.
Yeah, look at those two. They really are pretty spot on. Now, one of the big things that stands out, that cocking piece is totally different.
Yes, this had a round cocking piece.
Yeah.
They would change that when they went over to the 1895 long rifles that most people are familiar with. And then a totally different cocking piece ended up in Swiss service with a big thumb pad.
Yeah, it's really easy to use compared to that guy. It feels weird to have to grab a little knob as opposed to, I can just wrap my thumb around this guy and recock it if I need to.
Yeah, this is thumb and forefinger. That is definitely just put your big old meaty thumb on there and pull back.
But definitely cool. I feel like we got a mishmash of systems here, and you're not right. It's definitely Mannlicher-esque with that.
Right. So how do you feel about this stocking?
Well, to be honest, I'm digging how light it is, but I do wish I had a semi-pistol grip with this guy. It's kind of sad that we're not going to see that until the 11 series, because they didn't put it on anything before that, right?
I'm stretching my memory. I can't remember if the 1905 had it or not. I do know by the time of the 11s, they are firmly into having a semi-pistol grip stock. However, for the 89 and 90, they were straight wrist. Interestingly, the Austrian 1890 did have a semi-pistol grip, so that might have been their taste for it. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
But
it feels pretty good. And then also, I hope, I think you did mention in the episode, other features going on. This is not what the trigger guard should look like right here. There is actually a dent right here.
Yeah, that one's taking a karate chop.
At some point to a rock or something. God only knows. But yeah, weight, balance, it's all right there. It feels really good in my hands. I do love that.
I much prefer the full stock, especially when I have to handle a hot gun.
Yeah, everywhere is covered, so I really don't have much concern other than if I were to grab like the receiver directly or something like that. But otherwise, it's all there.
Yeah,
which is pretty great.
Usually when we're filming, Mae shoots and then hands me the gun. We clear, and then we put in a new gun and hand her new ammo, and she holds her position as much as possible.
My feet don't really come up if I don't have to because we have those cameras set.
Right.
And moving them around takes a little too much effort, so it's much easier if I just stay still for the 40 minutes or so.
Right. In doing that, I tend to be the one that handles the hot barrels. So I really appreciate a full stock because every once in a while I forget. And I found it especially
Nothing
hard.
like a hot barrel on a hot day in Charleston.
Yeah, don't forget, this is the same action as the Mannlicher. No handgun.
None. No, it's just, I hand it over to you and I try to make sure you've got some finger grooves to grasp on there.
Right. So, but you get rocking and rolling. Boy, I've burned my fingertips a few times.
Yeah. You just eventually stop feeling.
So what's the, how's the action feeling?
Well, this is straight pull, so previously in the series, we did operate a lot of the straight pulls. I would bring them down to operate them. And that was mostly for two reasons. One, for safety reasons. I wanted to make sure I was checking the chamber as I was opening the actions. And two, realistically, it was fatigue because a lot of those days I was just handling like up to 8 or 9 guns on range that day. And I wasn't as strong as I was now. So it became a bit much to have to operate them as time went on.
Even without the strength, I want to point out we're in Charleston, South Carolina. So when we filmed this gun, as much as it looks like Mae's enjoying herself, that day was 94 degrees with 95% humidity.
Oh, yeah. Love it.
So
I'm used to breathing swamp.
You wear out fast. We're not going tactical just on that front.
No.
Second is she's doing a string of them. Third, we're usually watching the ammo on the guns because for this gun, which required some special attention, we still only fired 30 rounds out of it.
Yeah, and then like we wanted to make sure, of course, ammo was tested previously, so maybe 30, 35, something along those lines.
That's true. But on range, you're talking about maybe 30 rounds.
Right.
And that's all the experience you really get to have with the gun because we got to go on to the next thing. We're always in production and also just making the ammo is a pain.
And granted, these guns get a lot of inspection before we take them to the range, but you never know. They're 100-year-old guns. Something could go wrong.
It's almost like something did go wrong with this gun, but we'll talk about that in a moment.
It's foreshadowing.
However, and this is relevant. I know this seems like a side story, but it's very relevant. You'll see in a moment.
Right.
What happened is with the series, originally we realized we're going to take the guns down and bolt them low because we got a camera that can watch what's happening.
Yep.
It slows down the rate of fire enough for Mae to get at least not exhausted. It slows down the rate of fire enough for some quick inspection as you're going, so somebody's always watching the cases as they come out of the gun. So if Mae runs the gun as fast as she reasonably can, we can't watch what's happening fast enough. And certain guns, like the Gewehr 88, can suffer a double feed and out of battery ignition. So like a Gewehr 88, you really don't want to run it as fast as you can, because if you mess up, you can mess up.
That would be kind of fun to get experience with, but I don't think it would be something with a lot of these guns unless I had, I guess, a lot of experience with that particular piece.
Right.
Would I feel comfortable with it? And a lot of these are loaners, so one, they're not ours, and two, sometimes on range is the first time I'm handling them too. I'm going to want to be extra careful with them.
By the way, if you own these guns and you want to film running them hard, go for it. They're your property. You know the gun. You have the time. I highly recommend trying it out. Sure. We're not against it being done at all. It's just that it doesn't fit in with our schedule for everything else we're doing.
Right.
So we ran into a problem when it came to lever actions particularly, because lever actions are terrible to work from the hip.
Absolutely.
So we had to hybridize where Mae was paying attention and slowing down a little bit.
So if you notice, my head actually pokes up over the top of those. And that's what we did with this one too, which was I kept it at the shoulder, operated it there, and I was popping my head up every time just to keep my eye on those cases, make sure they looked okay when coming out, and looked good going in.
It also turned out to be good that she was doing that. And we'll say why in just a second, because that's going to lead us into the next topic. What's it like actually shooting the gun?
So actually shooting this guy. Let's talk about actually loading. So we've got the charger loaders, first off. We're getting in 6 rounds and...
Cardboard.
Yeah, love these guys. Honestly, they're really straightforward and simple.
Did it feel any different than using it on the the Swiss rifles? I mean, it's a Swiss rifle, but the Schmidt rifles?
To me, they really didn't feel any different. Like, it felt just as smooth, just as rapid with it. And
you have to learn to do the bloke on the range thumb flick. Have you seen that?
Yeah, I have. He's pretty good at that.
He shoves them in there and flicks his thumb.
Yeah, right?
I know. It's like he gets to practice with them instead of just seeing them once.
Mr. Smooth bloke over there.
Uh-huh.
But no, I found that pretty straightforward, simple. They went in nice and easily. The mag cooperated with me that day, so great, fantastic. Looking down the sights, I will say on these sights, they are kind of cool in that I like the idea that I've got to flip back. I can switch from 300 to 400 pretty rapidly.
How clear were they?
As far as the sights go, I'm trying to remember actually. No, actually, yeah, they're pretty good. It's V-notch with a prong in the center. Like, I find those pretty rapid acquisition sights.
Mae has forgotten, but on range, I distinctly remember her throwing it up and being like, "Ooh, sight picture."
Yeah, it's kind of cool sight picture, like all the prongs sticking up. Mm-hmm. Maybe that would get confusing for somebody, but to me, it felt like easy, straightforward acquisition. The only concern I might have with these flip back 400 sights is that you do have to flip them back to go to the 400, obviously, but then you do have to have them flip back to go to like 500 and 600 and so on.
And the way they're set up, the 400 when the 400's folded, it kind of blocks your ability to push the button.
Kind of.
So I see what they were doing. They're trying to make sure that you flip them up, then push the button.
But it's like, it's two different actions that you are doing. And I feel like for soldiers, you kind of want to make things as little complicated as possible for something that they may need to use in combat.
And you can mess them up.
Yeah.
So it's possible to get it folded to, I believe it's only the 500 and 600 marks that I was able to get it to happen.
Maybe 700, I could see it.
No, I don't think so.
No, not 700. Yes, 600 is the highest you can go.
So on 500 meters and 600 meters, you can still read the original 300 meter sight because there's two. May I see that?
Yeah.
There's essentially two rear sights. There's one here at the front where the hinge point is, and then there's the 400 notch when you flip it back.
Yep.
If you leave it folded down and manage to wiggle her into, which I just did no problem, into 500 or 600, you'll be off 500 meters.
Yeah, you can still technically read it with that frontmost rear sight position, which is not great because you are 100 off. I mean, maybe not terrible. Maybe you're still going to be okay, but not by great.
Yeah, I noticed they didn't really keep that system.
No.
It seems really neat, but they probably ran into trouble.
Yeah, me personally just being like, ooh, that's kind of neat. I can flip back for 400. And then me thinking of it critically, maybe not the easiest thing for them to get used to.
Yeah, between that and the bolt assembly on this gun, this is a thinking man's carbine, let me tell you.
Definitely so.
So,
and then,
you shoot the gun.
Well, yeah, trigger. Mm-hmm. So the trigger on this one was actually pretty nice. I don't find it quite as nice as things like, say, the 89 or the K11 because the take-up was pretty close in terms of light, but a fair amount of it, and then you hit a cliff wall. But for the 89 and the 11, I found that wall much easier to pull through, and this one, on the other hand, was just very heavy. It just got really heavy all of a sudden.
The best I can describe it is, we talked about this on the Swiss rifles. They have a very long, very light take-up. Mm-hmm. And then you hit the back, and it doesn't come to a cliff, I don't think. It sort of winds up tight. And then you pull through. I guess that's a better way to put it, because it does feel like you travel some distance in there. Yeah, and it's very pillowy, and then it lets go. Yeah. And it's lovely. You can get very accurate with that. It's quite good at it, yeah. If you do this with the Mannlicher, the 1890, is a medium take-up brick wall and then a heavy pull-through, like so many other military rifles. Right. This feels like the Swiss tried to polish it, but it is ultimately the same mechanism. Mm-hmm. So you end up with a very long take-up, brick wall, and then medium pull, to me. Is the best I can describe it. That's actually pretty good, yeah. Yeah, it's very good, but it's not as good as the usual Swiss rifles. And then recoil on this guy, I found it was moderate to high. I guess I want to put it somewhere in the category of like probably Springfield 1903-ish. Yes, somewhere in that short rifle range. Yeah, it definitely does have a kind of a kick to it. I was paying more attention to the action, so personally on range that day, it took me a minute to register how much recoil I was really experiencing, but no, it was pretty up there. I think it's because the gun does a lot to mitigate that. That's true. It's pretty low in its stock. It has a very nice curve on the butt plate that really I can set it deep into my shoulder. I really did set it in there very well. It was quite nice. Yeah, it's nice and narrow to the front. You have a good grasp on it. It's very controllable. However, it is significant recoil. Yeah. And then you went to cycle the gun. Well, hold up. I did want to mention the safety real quick. I forgot to talk about that entirely. Sure. The safety on this guy, pretty easy to operate because it's flip on and off.
in that it's very straightforward to operate, I guess, and that makes it easy, but it is a bit stiff. I think I found that, and I didn't do this on range, and I could have, if you pull the cocking piece back just a little bit, it's like butter. It just goes on so easy, but of course, me being me on range, I just managed it on and off.
Watch that, see how much her hands are shaking when she takes it off? That's what bothers me about these. It's bothered me about the Mannlichers, the 1890s and 95 Mannlichers. It's always bothered me how you have to come completely out of position to work the safety, and then it's a very stiff safety, unless you thumb the cocking piece and play with it, and then you're two-handing the safety.
That's true.
It just doesn't seem like a very good combat safety to me.
I guess I could see that.
All right, so now I'm really excited for this part.
Okay, he's built it up.
Because she shot the gun, it went bang, and then you go to cycle the bolt, and we're doing our hybrid system, where we've decided, okay, we're going to start cycling straight pulls from the shoulder, but we're going to get your head up and look down and really see what you're seeing. I'm going to keep an eye on the brass. We're going to try to go, at a good rhythm. But these guns really like it when you snap them open and closed.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if anybody's handled a Mannlicher 1895. They're usually the most available thing in the market. They feel exactly like this. And they have if you try to open them slowly, God help you. If you open them quickly, they're nice and smooth. Well, if they're not a rebuilt one that's poorly fitted.
Yeah.
So zip zip is always the way to go. So Mae throws it to her shoulder. Boom. Thankfully looks over the action. Zip, and what'd you get?
I got a whole face full of bolt that day.
Yep.
And this is why, ladies and gentlemen, I don't just zip. I don't just speed through these. Would it be easy to totally do? Absolutely. Would I love to do that? Definitely. I'd love to do some of the Mad Minute stuff.
Easy is you get exhausted, but
you get exhausted, but I would love to practice that, and I would love to get really good at that with some guns. But the problem is that, well, one time, and then two, honestly,
every once in a while,
I don't trust them, and that's why.
Why do you leave your thumb to the side? Well, because several have tried to eat my thumb. Why do you not whip the bolts back and forth? Well, because sometimes they come out of the freaking gun into my face.
And honestly, I wasn't in any danger with that, because aside from just whacking myself with a bolt, because lugs were all fine, everything was working internally, they were turning in place.
Hold on, let's be fair. The first time it happened was not on camera. That was the one you're seeing. We already knew it was a potential issue.
Oh yeah.
The first time it happened, how freaked out were you?
I was pretty freaked out, because you're not expecting that. You're expecting it to stay in the gun. The thing that you're operating to push in all the cartridges and stuff, you're expecting to keep doing its job and staying with the gun. You don't expect it to come flying at your face.
Yeah. So the first time it came ripping out,
I just looked at it, and then I looked at it, and I was like, did I do that?
I know. I dove on it to figure out what was going on. Our buddy David, who does the ammo, was there. He was like, what the heck? I look, and the thing that really bothered me is I couldn't replicate it.
No, he couldn't. He tried. And
so
I think he managed to one time.
Well,
and your total use of it.
It was our test firing day.
Yeah.
That it first happened with you. It was your first shot.
Yeah.
And from there, we test fired it 8 times and then had to go back and reload ammo again for the episode. And Dave and I both couldn't replicate it. No. So we thought, I concluded, falsely, that
I must have bumped something?
Yeah, so it's the bolt stop is on the right-hand side. And the bolt stop on this gun, it's very interesting. It rides into the bolt a little bit to give it a little bit of resistance from opening, so that it doesn't...
bolt release.
Yeah, so that way if you snap the butt on the ground or something, the gun just doesn't fall open, right? It's to keep it from inertially opening. It's just a little... It's almost like a detent bias, right?
Sure.
So what I figured was, okay, the gun needs a cleaning, because what probably happened is Mae whipped it back, and it popped out, and it just got stuck by grit or something, and then it didn't pop all the way back in, and therefore... It just inertiaed out, stayed out, and then it came out.
Right.
That was my assumption. But I cleaned it, we got it back out there, and it kept happening to you.
Just me.
I only managed to replicate it once, and it's because I was varying my rhythm to try to get it just right.
Yeah.
And it's something about Mae's rhythm timed out just right. So what was
it times out just perfectly.
We tried catching in high speed, but we ran out of ammo.
Yep.
And you'd gotten off the rhythm.
But you can kind of see it a little bit, and I'll probably show a little zoomed in section of me actually whipping the bolt back.
Right. And if you look carefully, you can see that the bolt stop, what it does is it starts bouncing down the bolt because it's been popped out, and then it comes back in and slaps the metal, and it bounces again. So what it did is Mae's rhythm was just fast enough that
if I whipped it like what felt natural to me, it would just bounce just enough.
It would flip out, strike about the middle of the bolt and bounce, and then boom, that's when the locking lug came through, which is what it was supposed to catch on.
Yep.
And then Mae was ripping it out of the gun every time. So we had to slow down your rhythm. So that's why on this particular one, your footage looks a little weird because you kind of have this double cadence.
Yep, I basically have to go pop, pop in order to prevent that and from me just ripping it out of the action every time.
Right. Now, of course, this can probably be blamed on slack developed in the spring, but I would consider this to be a major fault of the rifle. And
the
I'm surprised
fact that can be done, period.
I mean, it happened to us, and I can find no mention of it, but then again, I have so little in the way of Swiss records, I don't know. There may be something there because the gun's so poorly researched. I wonder if that's come up before.
If anyone happens upon research that does support any of that, or talk about that at all, let us know.
Yeah, I'd love to see more on that because it has to have come up with that many troops.
I'd be curious to see, or if it just simply is just a matter of it's a 100-year-old gun and it did finally have a part that wore down, and that was the part.
I don't know. This was loaned to us by Chase, by the way, so thanks, bud. And,
thanks for the loan.
I'm sorry about your bouncy gun. I did stretch the spring on range so that it would sort of stop doing this. It seemed to help a lot. I think we only had one instance of it after I stretched the spring some. So
yep. I still slowed down to be on the safe side because, again, not super great for footage if every single time I'm having to put the bolt back in.
Now, the other thing that we found on this gun, which happened to us at least once, is that the magazine shot loose.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Because it has a...
Is it the follower just kind of floated in there? Or?
No. It's it probably got... It's the release button is all set up linearly with a compression spring in line with the gun.
Okay.
So when you fire, it bounces the release. And if that spring tension's not high enough, again, another slack spring issue over wear, then you can bounce the magazine loose. And we had at least 2 bad feeds from that. So that's another thing that I had to kind of go in there and clean up and...
make sure all the grit was out of it.
Yeah, I took it back out, but on that one, I actually had some paper straw with us on range, and I tore it up and put it in there to give some more pressure to the spring.
Okay.
But it's 2 springs. I had to bulk up 2 springs in this gun.
So you have a C&Rsenal souvenir in your gun. Is it still in there?
No, I took it out.
Oh, okay.
So
well, never mind then. You don't get that.
If you have to stretch your springs or replace them, man, my bad, but they're getting old. So I guess that brings us around to whether or not you agree with the Swiss. Is this the kind of gun you would keep and take into battle, or is this the kind of thing you'd be looking to kind of get off your plate?
Well, considering I kept smacking myself in the face with the bolt, I'm probably going to go with a no on this one. Just a general no. Not even soft, moderate, large, just no.
All right, so it's complicated. Theoretically, the Mannlichers are prone to jamming if they build up rust or dirt, although I have not experienced that yet.
Theoretically, we haven't experienced it at all.
But ours are clean and we don't mess with them.
And we do clean them.
I could mud test them in the sense I could throw mud on them, but that's not really how that would happen. What would happen is they'd start suffering rust from being in the field for long periods of time.
Yeah, so not really, it'd have to build up.
That's a destructive test. Like, there's no way I could do that test without ruining a piece.
No.
But in theory, they have more friction surfaces inside the bolts, so therefore they develop problems sooner. I also can't do deep cold weather experiments because, again, Charleston, South Carolina, but I have a feeling that because of the number of mating surfaces, they're probably not as good in the cold weather as the K series would be or the Schmidt series would be.
Mm-hmm. But if it weren't for the part wears, so if I'm trying to think of this a little more critically, if it weren't for the fact that both of these parts were a bit worn out, both the springs.
What if we think about it as just an evolution as this? Because this was a serviceable little carbine.
That was okay.
It's got some, vulnerabilities to mud. They're gone.
Right.
Right. We're no longer end block clip loading. We're stripper clip loading.
And we've got a full stock, so we're fully protected.
In every way,
the sights are better.
In every way, that is better than this. And I can't even recall whether you gave this a yes or no, but I feel like this probably did get something of a soft yes.
Probably, yes. So if anything, if this had given us a perfect performance, it probably would have had an actual yes.
Yes, assuming your magazine stays in the gun and the bolt stays in the gun.
Yeah. Assuming the gun all stays together, that would have been radically better.
Yeah, but that also kind of goes to show you that we're just this little last bit is an opinion, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's just projection based off of a small number of rounds. The actual experiences can vary pretty wild. Mm-hmm. So,
and to be fair, if we hadn't had the faults that had occurred, I'd probably still had similar concerns about potential errors, at least with this bolt release.
You think so? I don't think we'd have ever noticed.
Maybe. I mean, it's possible. It's so simple to operate it, and I could see myself potentially whacking. I don't know. It's maybe a concern I could have had. That's the thing. I don't know.
To be fair, on the original Mannlicher, the bolt stop is built into the trigger, and you have to push the trigger forward, which means if you're death gripping the trigger or not paying attention, it's just holding it in tighter for you.
Right.
So, I don't know. I definitely think they should have kept the original bolt stop.
Yeah, that seems better.
That's not a great bolt stop.
No.
But only because of the fluke that we managed to see the problem.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is kind of a weird one for you. It's like Schrodinger's yes or no.
I didn't think I'd ever really find a Swiss that I would say no to, kind of, but I'm kind of still leaning towards that no just because I really don't like that bolt.
Well, personal experience tells you no, but logic tells you yes. And I'm going to tell you, most soldiers would go with personal experience.
Yeah, they would.
All right, well, how are you feeling, Mae? Would you still, do you still think it's beautiful? Do you still think it's fun?
Yeah, I still find it heck of fun, and I still thought it was absolutely beautiful gun to shoot, and there's a lot of pro with it. I just personally have such a poor experience with it just because of my natural use with it. I wish I'd had the experiences you and David and other people had shot it, but no, I just get the bad experience.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this is just bitterness talking, because this is the one Swiss rifle that she does not own, because she bought up all the other ones when they were cheap, and now we're broke and can't afford something as nice as this.
To be fair, and they're also nice ones, so yeah, I don't have to shop the top end of the market.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I don't think we could afford to have your collection if we were trying to buy it today.
Nope.
But that's why you get in early, folks. Yeah. And for all you who just turned 18, sucks for you. We got there first. I know. I feel so bad for this guy. Sad. That's all right. They tune in here and they can get informed as possible so that they don't, they get exactly what they want.
Okay.
Because the one thing we didn't have is this sort of in-depth warning ahead of time.
Yeah, that's true. We definitely did not have that. That would have been nice.
No, it was a free-for-all of who knows what you're getting.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed this one.
Yep.
Have a good one.
Bye.
How about a little good news for an update? Just this week, we've managed, with the help of a good friend, to positively begin a much requested project. For those of you who aren't supporting us on, say, Subscribestar or Patreon or Utreon, the image on your screen is a handy clue. See you next time.